Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to this session entitled Co-Producing for the International Market. Our panelists for this morning's session are Salim Brahimi, director and producer, Julie Billy, producer of Haute Écour, Rula Nasser, founder and producer of Imaginarium Films, Sébastien Deloy, producer of Entre Chien et Loup, and our moderator is Tara Morel, project manager of International Cooperation, Co-Production, and Bilateral Funds from CNC. Please give them a warm welcome.
Hi. Hi, everyone. I'm very delighted to be here, so thank you for coming. So we have the chance to welcome a very interesting producer, so Sébastien from Belgium, Rula from Jordan, Julie from France, and Salem from Alger. So today we will be discussing about international co-production. We will see what are the challenges, the benefits, how do you attach international talent that work for the international market. And so I think it would be nice, first instance, if you could all introduce yourself. Sebastian, perhaps?
Hello, everyone. I'm a film producer based in Belgium, a company called Entre Chien et Loup. We've produced about, co-produced or produced about 100 feature films. And now we're opening ourselves to TV series.
Hello, I'm Rula Nasser. I'm a producer based in Jordan. I worked on many Jordanian and regional films in the area, and I have a project here in the collection.
Hello, my name is Julie from Haute in France. So we are a 20 years old French production and distribution company, and we produce 2 films a year and 1 co-production as minor co-producer a year, and release 1 to 12 films a year.
Hi, my name is Salim, and my particularity is that I based both in Paris and in Algiers. So I have a sort of a weird perspective, a schizophrenic perspective, I'd say, on co-production.
Okay, thank you very much. So, you know, international co-production relies on complex mechanisms, so I think it would be nice, in first instance, if perhaps Julie and Sebastian, you would tell us a bit more, give us an insight of the European system to understand how it works and what are the benefits of co-production within the European context, perhaps.
Yeah, sure. I think that there are two ways of co-producing. First, for the veteran filmmaker, the one who are already identified, and for those one, making co-production is a way to maximize their financing on the international market and actually get to a bigger budget and bigger financing. And for the emerging talents, it's basically soft money that you can access to, but also subsidies, but also better visibility on the international market. You don't really get financing from the market or from TV pre-sales for young talents that are emerging, but still you get a better visibility. And in terms of funding in France, you have, for minority co-production, you have, of course, Arte TV channel, which is a great supporter of international filmmaker. You also have the CNC with the World Cinema Fund that is separated in 2 committees for emerging talent, first-time and second-time directors, and then for more identified and more veterans filmmakers, you got work in progress festivals like Les Arcs or other that give post-production grants that can get to 50,000 euros. So you have several soft money process, but as well some market strong TV pre-sales that you can get.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, what Julie is referring also is, I think it's mainly for what would be foreign productions coming towards us. What is also interesting is that if you manage somehow to get like a French stamp or European stamp on your film, then you can access other kind of helps like tax shelter money that will come from different countries. We have a lot of regional fundings also, but all of that is usually based on spendings. And the problem that often have is that you have, I would say a lot of art house films coming from outside our very low budget film and they just can't afford to spend so much. So you have I would say you have somehow two worlds in a way. The European one, where the average would be probably around close to 2 million, I would say, films. And what is done outside in art house, which would be probably reaching more like 600 or 700 or sometimes a lot less. So it's just two ways of working.
Okay, and I think it would be maybe nice, I don't know if you all know, but like how does it work like when you have like an international production agreement between two countries? What is the legal framework which enables you to make such international co-production? Can you tell us a word about this? Or?
Well, it really depends on each country. So,
Yeah,
for example, for me in Belgium, to produce with the Arab world, my only getaway is Morocco, actually, because that's where we have a co-production agreement. But the way I can do it is because in France they're much more open. So that's great. They do co-production with France, and I can co-produce with France.
Yeah.
So we find triangular ways of doing it. But basically, when you go straight, for me, it's quite reduced. I mean, besides Morocco, I can't do anything. But I would say each country. This is also something important when you guys talk with your national representative. Just tell them to have the most co-production agreements that they can have, because that will really benefit for all these productions. Why was I saying that? I forgot.
I don't know.
Sorry, bit tired.
Fine. And so what about the opportunities for Arab filmmakers coming to Europe? I mean, we of course have like in France, I'm sorry, I'm working for them, so I have to say the name in French, Aide au Cinéma du Monde, which is a very special fund because it's a universal funding, which is, it's open to every country in the world. So you can be from Italy, you can be from Morocco, it doesn't matter, it's open, and we have, it can be in any language, I mean, it's very open. And so we have this in France, and for first and second movie, and for more experienced filmmakers. But what about the other opportunities in the rest of Europe? We have World Cinema Fund, for instance, but maybe you can have more ideas.
As I was saying, there is Eurimage, there is World Cinema Fund, there is those post-production fund, regional post-production fund that you can access as well. And CNC, the CNC de Cinéma du Monde, I'm not going to praise for it, but still it's a very competitive subsidy, but it's a very great one actually, because you just have to spend half of the fund in France when you get it, and it's kind of easy to do it, even though our costs in France are way more expensive. I think we'll talk about that with Rula. We had this conversation right before. So producing with France also has a cost. I mean, our post-production labs, everything has much higher fees than anything else that you could find in the Arab world. So it's you can get up to 150,000 euros, and you have to spend half of it, and you don't actually need to get the French agrément, this national authority stamp that you must get for bigger co-production further than 2.5 million. So when you're under 2.5 million euro budget, you don't need this agreement, and then it makes the co-production way more easy and smooth. And it's a great fun, and I guess it's the main one you go to when you come from the Arab world.
Sebastian, can you tell us about Eurimage? Because I think it's a very special kind of funding for European countries, part of the European Council. And from this year, we also have Canada who joined the fund. So it's, I mean, very, very big amount. Perhaps you had...
Well, basically, you can't access it. I'm sorry.
Yes, I mean, if you're 30%, I mean, if you have like...
Unless.
Yeah, there is a way, which is legal. No, and I was involved in we're ultra minority co-producer as Algerians, and the fact is that we managed to activate Eurimage, and that was in a sort of very, which will touch to co-production agreements. Okay, it was an Algerian, French, Greek co-production, a film called À mon âge, je me cache encore pour fumer by Rihanna, that we co-produced with Costa Gavras' company. And we had Eurimage, and we just had 2 European countries because France and Algeria have a co-production agreement by which we could actually sort of knock down, because I think it's 3 co-producers within Europe normally, Eurimage?
No, you can have with 2 now.
Okay.
Yeah.
It used to be 3.
Before
I
it
think.
used to be 3, yeah.
So we had the 2, and if we just basically activated the co-production agreement and did the dance with, with all the authorities, we could come back and actually have it made in Arabic with access to the funds. So there is a way, and in a way, this film, it so happens that because there was a lot of nudity in the film, it was easier for us to shoot it in Greece, because it's in a hammam, so obviously you're not really dressed in a hammam. So it so happens that we shot in Greece for that reason. Had we not had that, it would have typically been a film where we would shot a lot in Algeria, in Arabic, with Eurimage. But you need those co-production agreements, and this is where, from the other side of the Mediterranean, one of the important things is not only, if we talk to our representatives, is not only having co-production agreements, it's actually making them work, which means that you need the bureaucracy to actually activate those agreements. It seems very silly, but the Franco-Algerian co-production agreement is very loosely worded. It open to quite a lot of interpretation because it's very they did it quite quickly for political reasons. And then obviously in France you have the CNC, which is the place where you sort of get the stamp. It's very sort of straightforward. In Algeria they hadn't set forth the bureaucratic process by which you actually validate, which means that it took us a year to go back to Eurimage and to CNC saying, okay, we sort of had the... So it's very important if you talk to your representatives about co-production, not only to sort of fight to get your co-production agreements with your countries, but also make sure that you know who to talk to actually make them work. If not, it's just a piece of paper.
Okay, thanks. So I think it's a nice way to go to ask Roland now, what about the opportunities in the Arab world for funding?
We had this discussion before many times. The thing that how we are looking at the co-production is a little bit than how the European is looking at the co-productions in each other, because we are looking for a soft money, which is honestly it's not there, because it has an expense to do a co-production. For example, with France, whatever you can do in the Arab world, it could be much cheaper. But the problem that there is no money, and what's happening lately that everything is like shutting down. The amounts of money that we are getting is getting less and less, which is it us in a position that we see the big picture, but we can't do it. And everyone is like moving and encouraging to do co-production. But what we have in the Arab world to go and say, we want to do co-production. This is only on the money issue. However, co-production, how it can be very beneficial for us is like the exposure of the films. Distribution, getting more audience, telling more stories. But we are losing the base.
And so perhaps I was wondering, as veteran producers, as you mentioned, what is the goal for example, for French and Belgian producers coming here to the Dubai Film Festival, to the Dubai Connection Market? I mean, what do you look for? What are you looking for?
Interesting projects, I would say, stories bigger than life, something that would be different. I think we have so many projects during the year, all the time that we're receiving, and if you go in any geographical zone in the world would have very different topics, very different filmmakers, new talents. I mean, it's really, I think, just to keep your eyes open and ear open to pitches, whatever. I think it's that. It's not money. We're not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is also
unfortunately.
it's always to go and it's always good to roam around and see good talents, and this is the options that we have now. It's always nice to be in markets where you see other producers, you pitch your projects. At the end, we do co-productions, but we will be a much better and different way of making the films if the infrastructure in the Arab world is much better. But it's very beneficial at the end to have partners in Europe. It's part of the storytelling.
think it's the same as Sebastian, and as we are a distributor as well, it's also a way for us to track the film even when it's not for co-producing, but it's to track the film way early so that we can get an eye on what is going to be shoot and what is going to do his way through festivals. So it's also an eye for maybe acquiring the film later. So yeah, it's a great place to also meet new emerging talents that we don't have access to in France. So it's a great market. And also, for instance, last year the film by Khalil Joreg and Johanna Gil-Thomas was actually at the co-production market, and we are co-producing it with Coproducing from Lebanon. So it's we always meet people, and it's a great start for a project.
I'd like to add something from a very sort of perhaps local Arab world perspective. A place like the Dubai Film Festival or other festivals in the Arab world, as opposed perhaps to Cannes, I don't want to seem touchy-feely, but it is also to find a sense of community. Because co-production also, I mean, what I really admire about the European system is that beyond the mechanisms, the sheer, legal framework, which is quite elegant, but beyond that, you can see that, what was built in Europe was a sense of shared, destiny, something that is sort of bigger. It makes sense to make a European film. It wasn't the case actually 20 years ago. They talked about Euro pudding because, it was sort of those weird sort of things that didn't really work, but they made it work. And they made it work because it's a culture, it's, a way of sense of community where, you feel comfortable. I live in Paris, we work very well with the Belgians, obviously, we co-produce with them. We know that, their crews, their companies, and you start, being bigger than your own self. We don't have that in the Arab world. And if we want to talk about co-production, it's not only, it is, of course, it starts with money, obviously, and a legal framework. But it also is a sense of community. So perhaps from a very personal perspective, it's always frustrating to realize that you're connecting with other Arab filmmakers outside of the Arab world, in Cannes, in Toronto, wherever. So it's nice to have a few places. Carthage is one of them. Dubai, obviously, is one of them, where you can have that sense of community, talk shop. Oh, you did your film this way. You had that problem. Rant about Donald Trump. Stuff like that. So it's good to have that in terms of community.
And just to rebound on this, it's true that it has also, the co-production also has a strong artistic impact. When you are actually having a 5-country co-production, I would talk about The Lobster, for instance, that we co-produced by Yorgos Lanthimos. There were 5 countries, and we needed to spend money in each of those 5 countries, meaning that at one point you have to ask the director to go do some post-production there, do some color grading there, take maybe the editor from there, and this has artistic impact, and you have to think about this way early because you don't want to impose anyone to your director, and you need to find in the country the best thing that the country can also bring to your film. Meaning in France we have, for instance, in Belgium you have great sound people for mixing, and in France we have great, let's say, color grader.
Great everything.
Great what? Everything. Yeah, great wine as well. But
Of course we do.
Yeah, so it has artistic consequences as well.
Actually, when do you meet, when like a producer meets like an author or another producer, what is, according to you, the main criteria? Of course you said like you need to share like artistic value, and then can you tell us about this? Like when you meet someone, how does it work, or how does it not work?
It's more about the vision it's an encounter first, and when you meet someone, and a producer or a director with whom you have a strong encounter, this is the first thing, but it's also more about a vision. I don't think that there is something especially that we look for. It's more like the originality and the singularity of the story they're telling, which has to be universal in a way, but also very intimate and political sometimes. And it's more about the singularity, yes, I think.
Well, perhaps I don't want to be the naysayer, but perhaps that sort of allows one to touch on something. I don't want to be cynical, but it's the case. Co-production also generates sort of a side business. You have companies in Europe that are really specialized in co-production. They're happy to be a minority. They take their cut. They don't really care about what is being made. It comes from our perspective. It can kind of seem the dream sort of relationship. It costs that much. You'll have access to funds. No questions asked. Move on to the next. It is not. You want that sort of conversation. What Julie just talked about, sharing a vision, sort of, struggling, striving towards the same thing, because co-production at its best is a demultiplication of intelligence, and anybody who knows what a film is, I'd love to say that as a producer, director, I'm sort of this extraordinary mind. I'm not. Obviously, you're just as smart as the people that are around you, and they make you smarter than you are, and that's my case, and I think it's the case of many filmmakers. So when you have the right ecosystem, it really demultiplies the film. And then you look at the guy saying, I'll just take my 10% cut and, I'll do the dossier and send it to the CNC or Belgian fund or whatever. That's not the type of co-producer you want. And it's very hard when you're struggling for your own film, when you're a young Palestinian filmmaker and you meet some guy who tells you, you'll have access to Cinéma du Monde, I'll just take my cut and get out of your life, and that's that. It can seem like a sort of promising thing. Obviously, if you have to do whatever you need to do to make your film, obviously. And if you have to go with this guy, go with this guy. But if you can get that sort of conversation that Julie was just talking about, jump on it. It might be a few tense conversations, a few rows, but in general, when it's done intelligently by people who really have a passion for the project, you are being lifted that you're being pushed that higher by these people. So that's also a virtue of co-production. And you have to be very, very distrustful of the very cynical business of co-production, and there is one.
I think that a French producer, Jean Desforêts, was saying, I read this, amusing, said that co-production is like a marriage. It can be love at first sight, but it can end before court. So, you should find a good partner. And so I was actually wondering, Rula, I know you went in Cannes, in La Fabrique de Cinéma du Monde, with one of your projects, and this is how you met one of your co-producers. Could you tell us more about those kind of opportunities for producers who are looking for international opening and all those different programs, and I don't know.
Okay. It's in general, all the markets, it's an opportunity for any producer to look for partners. And whether in Dubai, in Cannes, in Berlin, it's our life. We keep meeting people and trying to find the people that we want to work with them. As Salim said, we can go and to any company and say okay, we will apply for this year. But the strength is how to find the right people that are seeing the right film and they are caring to make this story coming to reality, which is it gives life more for the film. I like Cannes, I like Berlin, I like Dubai. We keep meeting passionate producers, we keep meeting passionate authors, and I think it's not a program, it's how you sense the people that you can work with them. It's you who can find the right chemistry through all those markets.
And actually, I was wondering, do you think, co-production is always a good opportunity to take? Or, because Sebastian, you were saying earlier that sometimes it can be quite cost it's quite expensive, and there is many obligations, and in terms of spendings mainly. Can you tell us more about this?
Well, I think you mentioned it. One thing is, do you have a director who's going to be keen on working with other people? Because sometimes they just they just don't want to go there. So they're going to discuss every choice, anything you're going to suggest. All the TVs, they're going to think that they're not experienced enough, or they just don't want. And it's going to be such a big fight to making accept that I don't think it's worth it. That's one thing. The other thing is that you realize sometimes that you're actually you're just spending more on the overall, or that the difference is so thin that it's not worth it, that does arrive. On the other hand, I know a lot of films that that without the co-production would have never had, this spread of distribution because co-production is, it's also about, you have different funds, you have a lot of people who then know the film, will help you through the industry. So it does spread out the distribution, I think. So and so I think it's quite a good point there.
What about in the Arab world? Roland, Salim?
I will comment on this
Yeah.
because most of the successful films, by the way, in the Arab world, they were like co-produced films. Like if we look at Nadine Labaki film, what did in France, how much money it made, where is the audience, what's the outreach? It was always a very good module. Wajda, the same. It acquired that recognition from the co-production.
Co-production from an art perspective, it's a mixed bag of nuts, in the sense that if we really look at it honestly, it poses two problems, and I think the first is in our own house. It is true when you talk to the funds in Europe, and that you come from any part of the Arab world, you can get frustrated. They want to hear the same sort of thing, which is frustrating. Sometimes it's very Orientalist, sometimes it's this, that, and you have a year where it's just women's rights, next year it's Arab Spring, and you have the flavor of the month. And you feel that you have to do that tap dance to try and sort of seduce these people who believe, who live a few thousand kilometers away. Say, that's the issue. Very frustrating. It's true, but it's whatever system it is, it's a system. I mean, when you think of it, if you're a major director with American studios, well, it's all going to be about Marvel and DC Comics and whatever. You always have a taste of the moment, and so sometimes we have a chip on the shoulder as Arabs saying, oh, they want me to be something I'm not. Yes, it's true, but it's their God-given right. Second, and that's the real point, I think the real sort of damning question for us as Arab filmmakers, is why in God's name should a Dutch guy, a Swedish guy, and a German guy be interested by your film in Ramallah? And they are. That's fascinating, and I'm very grateful. So I'm a bit schizophrenic, because when I speak with the Europeans, I tell you, oh, well, you always ask the same thing. Then I go back to the Arab world saying, stop expecting too much. I mean, it's incredible that we managed to actually get films from, Palestine, Algeria, Iraq, made because some Dutch guy said it's an interesting script. I mean, why should they? Do we do the same? No, we don't. We don't do the same for our own. And the real damning question is, when will we have, they have a image, let's have an Arab image. When will we have that? When will we have the drive? And how come that when we speak to the powers that be, our ministers and everything, we rant about the West and why don't we rant about ourselves? Why, I say, Mr. Minister, why aren't you moving for us? I mean, you're working for me, Mr. Minister. Why aren't you working on an Arab image or on an Afri image? Okay, I'm in Algeria, obviously, we're Africa and Arab world. I'm happy, anything, Mediterranean, Arab, African, whatever you want. But let's just make something work. And we don't. We are, well, as in many things, even more so these days with the news, we are defeated. And so I think it's very unfair to expect from those funds to sort of, we expect them to be better and better and finer to understand what our issues. At some point, we have to remember that the people who should understand our issues are our own leaders, not some guy whom we say thank you to from Amsterdam or from Stockholm or whatever. And of course, they have their limits and they're frustrating, and and we have our fights. But it really, the co-production thing, for me, is a humiliating sort of thing as an Arab. It's humiliating that we need to do the dance all over Europe to tell our story from down the street. That's not right. And so it's very, very damning. The question of co-production is very sort of painful and damning when you think of it in terms of citizenry or in terms of cultural politics. It's very, very sort of, It's a bit.
It happened in the Balkan countries.
Sorry?
In the Balkan countries, when they got out of the communist bloc, they had almost no means, for the cinema whatsoever, and they really built up from the start with the small funds. They said, okay, They got together when it was Estonia, Lithuania, and the third one that I always forget. You know it? No. Yeah. Lithuania.
Yeah, and the other guys.
And those ones, but also the other one, they got together and to say, okay, how do we do to make our films, because we don't have enough money for one. And they started co-producing all the time together, so that the film would come alive. And then they said, okay, one of the countries will invest, for example, in having a good supply, just for electric light material and camera. The other one would invest into a studio for mixing. So they started to think, not just one country at a time, but on various countries, so that they could split the amount of it's not just money, but they could provide services, so that even the film, very low budget, would have a free mixing studio on one country, free camera on the other one. And I think this is a very good way to start. Now they have money. They didn't have at the time. Now they have more. And of course, it created a kind of coalition that makes that today, when you have a Balkan film, it's usually 3 or 4 countries on one side, and they always get your image. We get a bit pissed sometimes. But I think this could be a way to go, I think, around here, because it starts actually quite easily with not so much money, and then it can grow.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. No comment.
I think also what Salim was saying is that, in the sense that today on, the Arab cinema is depending partly on this European system, like is one kind of movie that is actually being co-produced, like art house movie. And so we were talking earlier about those movies. I mean, what's the public? I mean, of course, it's like festival, made for festival, but in the Arab world, what kind of cinema are people interested about? Is it this kind of cinema? Or?
I think we are touring and discussing the same thing. The problem is the unity, because if you look at the population of the Arab world, it could be, wow, a very big audience. But still, till today, the Egyptian film is seen all over the place. The Jordanian film is being seen only in Jordan. The Emirati film is being seen in Emirat, even it's not a crossing. And this is the problem. Cinema is a crossing, and we are not able to do that. I don't know, it's politics, it's how we are developing things. It's the same issues with the funding. We had the same issues with the distribution. Can you imagine if all the Arab words, because we speak the same language and we read subtitles, we see French films and we read the subtitles. So why don't see a Moroccan film and they can read the subtitles?
There's another, I think, perverse aspect to co-production from a purely Arab perspective. It's wonderful that co-production allows, European co-production allows for those films to exist and go on the international circuit. However, we don't have an art house market as such, as cinema. So basically, and this is again something that is both practical in terms of market and money, and both political and moral. I mean, how can we really claim, for instance, I'll start with my own my latest film called Let Them Come. We were co-production, worked with French company, but in Algeria we still haven't shown the film. There is no market for it, so it is a problem, because then of course you can't raise money in Algeria, so it's because then for instance, there are quite a few rich guys who are thinking of investing in film, and then say, why would I do that? There is no market. Even if I did it out of vanity, you're not showing the film, so my vanity, I'd rather put my name on a football player than on your film. Why the hell should I do it? So it is a real problem in terms of business model, because we don't have a business model for those films. And it also is morally and politically a problem, because we're actually using Algerian funds to make an Algerian film that the Algerian public won't enjoy. How weird is that? So co-production generates this very, very, I'm not talking about my film, but I'm talking about other Arab films, very good films, that have a life on the international circuit and don't find an audience in their own home. So,
and do you think that the VOD, the arrival of big platforms like Netflix and Amazon can change that?
I don't know if there's somebody from Netflix. We would love to hear them on that. What I know is this. I had a conversation with them in Cannes, and basically they said, well, for the moment, we tried the non-English sort of thing. Okay, I'll tell you their narrative, I'll tell you mine. Their narrative is that they have those, this big data and studies and everything, and basically what crosses borders is science fiction, action, and horror. That crosses language barriers, the rest doesn't. So it was basically, so we're going to start looking at anything that is not science fiction, horror, or action. That's their side. What I was told, and I know nothing of these things, is that it's a self-defeating sort of system for us, the Netflix, because their algorithm basically pushes what is required. Now, the marketing strategy for our films is that you need to push them for people to know that they exist and then, give them a try. The system is perfectly circular on Netflix because of their algorithm. So then you have major directors, and they say, oh, the film doesn't perform anything. Great directors, I'm talking about Elias, Suleiman, people like that. They say, oh, but we bought the film and it doesn't perform. And you say, well, if you don't push it, it won't perform because people don't even know it exists because your algorithm is just pushing what people ask for. So I think those platforms are they are promising for us, but within the parameters today of how the algorithm works, on the one hand, I'm talking about Netflix here, and the way they look at the market, we're not there yet. But we will, I think. I think that they'll get finer and smarter as they go. Again, we shouldn't expect. In Streetcar Named Desire, there was this thing that Blanche Dubois says at the end. I have always depended on the kindness of others. Waiting for Netflix, waiting for whatever fun, everything is depending on the kindness of others. So I'm happy to tell them that the algorithm doesn't work for Arab film right now, and it's true. But we always come back to the fact of what are we doing for ourselves in terms of co-production in the Arab world. With 300 million, I think, one language. If 27 languages in Europe managed to make something work, and they invented the concept of a world war, we're not talking about, these are the people who brought to the world the genocide and world war. And they apparently managed to figure it out with 20-something languages. So perhaps with one language, and a few shared problems, perhaps that we could, achieve something.
But also, I think it's something related to the film culture in the Arab world, because I think Netflix till now they are trying to understand our behavior. Okay, which
we're trying to understand our behavior.
Very weird. If you look at the immigrants, for example, Arab immigrants in North America, you can. I'm living there, I'm seeing them, how they are looking for the different films. They are not following the mainstream, and you see there is much more selection of Arab films or European films even in the networks in North America, and people are saying this. The problem also in us, by the way, it's what kind of films, what kind of stories, even though we're seeing a lot of Turkish soap opera that is dubbed. Yeah, so it's...
Turkish opera.
Yeah, the soap opera. Yeah, soap opera. So it's the problem is us. Still, we are not getting out of the bubble of seeing only Egyptian and American films. I think cinema is not in schools. How many cinematics we have? There's a lot of elements.
And to rebound on this, on the French market and on the distribution of Arab films in French market and of films in general from the world, and the distribution in France is getting. We are lucky enough to have a strong cinematography and a strong audience going into cinemas. We are very lucky to have this, and people go a lot to cinema to see very different films. So every week, 15 new films are going out into cinemas. The problem is that right now, as a distributor and as producers, we are struggling to keep films more than a week into cinemas. We are struggling to bring more films, more interesting films to the audience because the market is saturated, and co-production in a way doesn't help because we have a lot of co-production and it saturates the market. So for us, what is very important right now as producer and distributor is to really get the more interesting and the more singular film and the more elevated author film that we can, because we have to make choices to make sure that the cinema is still, that we still can keep this strong cinematography vivid.
What is the public actually? What is your distribution strategy when you want to distribute this author Arab movie in France, for example?
Well, I'm not the distributor. We have a distribution team, but I think it's the film, like we had La Belle et la Meute. I don't know, the Beast and the Beauty and the Dog. Yes, thank you. So the Beauty and the Dog is performing pretty well right now in France. Rajda was a great hit. Like we have a lot of Arab films that were very strong on the market because they have a strong press, and because they are very quality, good movie with a strong author vision. But there is no, like, for every film there is a different strategy, marketing strategy. It depends on the film, I guess.
Perhaps the festivals are getting more and more.
Festivals are very important.
Yeah.
I think that, again, having a home market can help, in the sense that, obviously, let's take any country. If we had a strong home market for, say, Lebanon or Algeria or whatever, obviously it helps, of course, international sales, because if you're performing strongly in your own home, well, it's a way for your partners to actually sort of, have a sense of what you can achieve in terms of market. I'm not big on market, but it is a reality we have to work with. And if we're talking about distributor, I mean, at some point they need to make money. So again, I think that we are kind of harmed by the fact that we come to Europe and to European distribution companies with not much of a track record, provable track record. And that's what distributors at the end of the day want. I mean, it's some form of track record. I mean, either they're convinced they have a love affair with your film, which is great, but if they don't have that, they need to have some parameter to understand why they should distribute it. And if they haven't fallen in love with your film, the other thing is the numbers. And we don't have any numbers because we don't have any market. So it's a sort of self-defeating sort of thing.
Perhaps it's question time. So do you have any question? Yes? Sinead.
Yeah, hi. To Salim's point about representation, self-representation, what is expected from Arab filmmakers, but also to the point of the algorithm on Netflix, I'm curious if we look towards the book publishing industry just as an example of how it's done. A Lebanese first-time author published a book recently, and he was talking to, like, his publishing house was talking to, like, booksellers in Lebanon about how his book is going to be displayed, and they said, we're not going to display it in the window of the store. On the window of the store, it's going to be J.K. Rowling, it's going to be Harry Potter from wall to wall. And he was disappointed, of course, and he was upset, but then they said, come visit our store. And this is a local bookstore. And so basically he went there and he found that indeed there was J.K. Rowling on the vitrine, on the front window. But the moment you step into the store wanting to buy the J.K. Rowling, you're not going to find J.K. Rowling on the shelf. You're going to find the Arab writers. And in fact, if you do want J.K. Rowling, you have to go through the entire store to the very back wall, passing several layers of Arab authors. So I'm wondering if there's an equivalent that we can find in Netflix, for instance, where, let's say I'm a Netflix subscriber and I get a notification in my email saying, the latest Star Wars movie is on Netflix now, but when I go to actually watch it, then the front wall is smaller movies, indies, whatever, and to get to Star Wars, I have to put many of those on my watch list before I get to it. I'm curious if you can see an equivalent there.
I think the equivalent wouldn't be on Netflix today. Perhaps it will be one day, but I don't see the digital equivalent. The equivalent is when you go and work your audience. And so, for instance, I know that in France, some films, and that's good distributors for small films that don't really have a market, they manage to sort of massage the market in a very, very smart way, where the director just does 30 cities and 30 premieres in 30 cities with 30 audiences talking about his film. And Tony Gatliff was telling me, he's a director living in France, was telling me one of his films, he told me, they knew they wouldn't perform if they didn't do that. And he told me it was like 3 months of his life, every other day in a different city, talking to audiences, and they performed very, very strongly, because that's what they did. As you say, you go to the cinema to go and see, Star Wars, and you hear that, Tony Gatliff is going to be there tomorrow, and say, why not? or he is here and you sort of change your mind saying, I'll be able to see Star Wars over the next 500 years, so this I won't. So there is an equivalent, but in the theater. The network, the sort of digital equivalent, I don't see it happening yet. Obviously, I don't want to do sci-fi, but obviously as the tools get more and more elegant, as the engagement online, as even virtual reality, because the thing is that the next big thing is that your huge screen you're going to have on your phone, So perhaps that when it becomes more interactive, more engaging, we'll have that. But right now, that's how I do it.
Thank you. Yes, Afnan Linjawi, I'm a screenwriter from Saudi Arabia. And I have two questions. The first one, you mentioned briefly Ciné du Monde, and you said that it deals with several, scripts from several languages. So I was just wondering for the others, do you have a preference of language that you accept scripts from, and other languages you just don't open yourself for that? And the other thing is, when it comes to the Arab world, is the problem content development? Do you not find enough scripts and stories and contents that are being done? Or is it that the ones that are done are not good enough in your view and your experience?
I can answer the second, and you can take the first question. And I think with cinema for the Arab world, away from Egypt, honestly, it's still something new. It's in developing. This is why we have a lot of problems, whether still do we have writers, we have directors. It's a question if we have writers, proper writers that can write for cinema. If you have directors, producers, still we are talking about distribution, about audience, so it's all developing. I think we are a place that are full of stories, and it needs someone to come and tell a story. To know how to tell the story is a craft that still we are working on it. So I think we have the content, still people are learning. The more films they are doing, the better. The more money we find in the Arab world to try and to experiment, it's much better to craft a good filmmaker as well.
Yeah, I think also it's kind of saying the same thing differently, but the team that is around the project is very important. I've seen a lot of what would look like very interesting pitches, but then you just realize that it's a filmmaker almost on his own, and he took a friend who is actually kind of a production manager trying to find money but doesn't find money, and then he's going to end up doing the film by himself for 15,000 euros or the double if he finds out money from his parents or whatever. And that kind of structure, for me, I just can't co-produce because there's nothing I can bring in terms of money. It's just too small. And also you just realize that the whole structure of it makes it quite incoherent. And usually the only success of that kind of film would be maybe to reach one festival, maybe two, not really more. So I think it's also, if you're a filmmaker, but that would apply for all the world, is have people with you that are a talent, and talent is not just the DOP, talent is also a producer. Talented producer who has nice connections, who's clever, who's gonna really push you as well. A lot of projects have a big lack of development in terms of script, a lot of them. They just get released too soon. And it's like, you go around the markets and then everybody tells you, oh, yeah, it's nice, but it's not that good, not enough. But then it's done. You've done all the markets, so it's too late. So I think this is also something you have to bear in mind.
Yeah, and I would add to that there are also lots of labs, like Sundance Lab, Torino Film Lab, that are focused on development, like the script lab for Torino. You don't need a producer to apply, and you can get scholarship, I think, to attend. And those labs are amazing in terms of what they bring to you in terms of artistic expert and quality of the consultants who are getting there, and also for you to see if your project really can have an international appeal or not. So those labs are a tool that you can use as a scriptwriter to develop your project to a higher level, I think.
Yeah, and just to finish on what I find an extraordinary virtue of co-production for even more, I don't like to say nascent film, because in fact film has been there and not there in the Arab world, I mean, to different degrees in different countries, so I don't want to be blanket, but it's very professionalizing, because you're with different people who have different standards, right or wrong, it might work for you, it might not, but it is very professionalizing. Going through the sort of acid test of having, you know, a French producer and a Belgian producer asking their own questions, some of them very, very smart, some of them off the spot because they don't live in Saudi Arabia or in, you know, or in Algiers. They will be off sometimes, but you always have something usable in that. So, and the more you have those conversations, so that's one of the great virtues, is the quality of the conversation that you get as you develop a film. And the more conversations you have, the more input you have, contrary to what sometimes young filmmakers believe is, oh, they're meddling with my, you know, masterpiece. No, they're not meddling. They're trying, you know, they have an immediate interest for you to make the best film possible. That's their first concern. Sometimes they don't really know how to make that happen. It's, you know, as any process. But, so it's very, it's demanding, co-production is demanding because you multiply those sort of moments of doubt. But it also is a very good acid test, and it's very professionalizing, because when you have that friend who's a line producer slash cinematographer slash makeup artist slash driver, he's your best friend, and he's sincere, and he's extraordinary, but he's not bringing you up to the standards that you will be judged by in the rest of the planet. So, that's what I found in co-production. It's really sort of, oh, okay, that's the way it works. Okay. So, but in the best of ways.
You were asking about the language? Yes. So, like, yeah, if we receive as producers, you mean, English? But please, find a good translator. That's really important, because if you knew how many scripts we receive that are full of mistakes, you know, because just the people, they're not really, it's not their mother tongue, and they're just, and that is terrible, because sometimes you would have a good script that is just completely spoiled by a bad translator. And I would say that's the most important. Then, for my country, I would have to translate it again in French, but that's, you know, that's another issue. That's when you believe in the film, you want to do it, and you just do that. But I would say very good translation in English.
And I would say, because in France we love French language project, and we have way more funding for French language project, but don't turn your main character into a French-speaking character if it doesn't make sense for your project. I mean, this is the worst thing you can do in a co-production, is to actually adapt in a very incoherent way artistically your character so that they fit into the co-production, and make a character Italian because you want an Italian co-producer on your project, and it doesn't make sense at all. So yeah, just be careful of not trying to put a lot of things that don't make sense actually artistically.
Good morning. You were talking about having to film in Greece because there were a lot of nudity scenes. What is the effect, or how does it affect the censorship that the Arab countries have towards the stories that we can tell and how they can be told? Does this close the doors to possible co-producing relationships? This also limits the type of stories that can be told because they have to be super edited. I'm not from here, but I'm trying to work as a filmmaker actress here, and half of the stories have to be cut down insanely. How does this affect this international relationship?
I mean, obviously it affects it a lot, and I might seem a bit weird about that, but I try to look at censorship in a sort of a broader perspective, because you have obvious censorship, where you basically redact a script saying, just, you know, this page is out. It's very, very basic censorship. Then you have self-censorship, what people tell you in a given context, oh, don't do that, you know, and in fact you realize that it's not much of a problem, self-censorship. And then you have something that everybody forgets about, because obviously we're very complex as Arabs, saying, oh, well, we have so much, and we do. And we really have an issue with that, and we really need to address it. That's not my point. We do, in every single country. Whatever we say about our own country, we have a problem. This being said, when someone tells you, I won't give you the time of day if you won't, you know, if you're not between this and that budget, and jump through those hoops and tell this story that way, and it needs to sort of perform in English internationally, whatever, as a lot of international, sort of big, huge, I'm not talking about European co-producer, I'm talking about the world market as it is today, it is economic censorship. So whatever the reason, you don't, you know, so you have, so what I'm saying is that if I'm giving this broader context, is that maneuvering that when you're from the Arab world is a multiple tier reality. The first part of which is actually dealing with your local censorship, then dealing with a self-censorship of people around you who tell you, oh, don't do that, you can never do that, I can't be part of it. You know, which I have already seen, which is just as difficult. Because in a way, it's a bureaucratic process, the actual censorship. It's wrong, it shouldn't exist, but it still is bureaucratic. Then what people have in their minds, people who shut a set saying, you're having someone naked in my house, get the hell out. You can't shoot. You have that.
You're saying as if we had a big censorship, I mean, compared to what we could find in terms of censorship here, it's very relaxed.
No, of course it is.
I mean, except if you do pornography, basically you can do everything.
Well, I'm not saying that there's a big censorship in Europe. What I'm saying is that we have censorship in the Arab world, which is bureaucratic, which is clear-cut. Then you have self-censorship when you shoot in the Arab world. We've had sets that were shut down because there was a scene where basically we had a case where it was just a man and a woman talking in a room alone. And there was a rumor in the neighborhood that we're doing pornography. And people just get out of my house, just get out of my house. And you can't shoot just like that. In the morning, they tell you get out. So you have self-censorship, that is a problem. And then you have something that I wasn't saying that, I was saying economic censorship, which is basically that at some point, if there's this sort of faceless thing called the market, and they say, well, oh, well, no, people don't want to hear this and they don't want to hear that. Technically, it is a form of censorship, but whether you like it or not. It's a market, it's faceless, it's clean, and that's the way we push a lot of things, you know, in the world today. So, you know, it's a market, it's sort of self-regulating sort of thing, but it still is a censorship. I'm not saying that it's some kind of controlling guy who sort of says, you can say that and you can't say that. But what I'm saying, just to answer your question, is that I think that because of those sort of different tiers, it's something that you know, Michelle Gavras told me when they shot Hannah Kay in Israel, she said, in a way, she'd rather, she told me in a way, it made her realize that when you have a society that is against an idea, it's worse than having one guy saying you can do this or not that, because you can always talk to that one guy. Having every single set close to you and not being able to shoot in a whole city is something, and that's reality we have. We have both. We have the censorship in the Arab world, we have censorship, and then we have the rumor and the thing. So it is an uphill thing, but it's part of the reality. And I always say, I was telling friends at Sundance, saying, well, you know what, we all talk about democracy. If you want something perfect, go to Sweden. You know, that's perfect.
So let's all go to Sweden.
Yeah, let's all go to Sweden. But if you're really interested in democracy, if you're really interested in following it's messy. And so you're in messy places where you're not allowed to do everything, and you have to push the envelope, push the envelope, push the envelope. That's what you're doing. And compromise is part of it. But again, if you don't want to compromise, settle in Stockholm. I'm told it's, you know, a bit cold, but nice.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm afraid I think time is running out, I was told. So thank you all for being here today. Thank you all for discussing those very interesting subjects. And well, I wish you all to have a very nice festival, and hope to see you around. Have a nice day.
Thank you.